They didn't laugh when she arrived with nothing, but they didn't welcome her either. She stepped off the train with a single case, a patched skirt, and a hopeful heart stitched together with threadbare letters and dreams she wasn't sure she had the right to dream. Her name was Clara May. She was 22 years old and had never owned more than a comb, a Bible, and her mother's broken brooch. But she had a promise, or so she thought. A man out west had written back, said he needed a wife, said it didn't matter if she had no dowry, said he was practical, not fancy, said he'd meet her at the station. But when the train hissed to a stop in Montana territory, no one came. Only whispers. Only glances from women in bonnets who looked her up and down and turned away. Only murmurs from men who said, "Guess she ain't much to look at or worse." Poor thing must have got lost on the way to nowhere, because that's what they saw. A girl too plain, too broke, too hopeful for her own good. And Clara stood there, not crying, not running, just holding the last letter he'd written, the one that said, "I'll be waiting." But he wasn't. He never was. He changed his mind, married a banker's daughter instead. Because even in the wild, untamed West, poverty still spoke louder than a good heart. But just when she turned to leave, a man stepped out from the shade near the feed store. Tall, dust on his boots, wealth in his name, but quiet in his eyes. And he said 5 words that changed everything, "Ma'am. You look like home." He wasn't the man she came for, but maybe he was the one who came for her. If you've ever been overlooked because you didn't have the right clothes, the right past, or the right name, if you've ever felt small in a room full of people who never saw your worth, then Clara's story might be your story too. Because sometimes love doesn't ride in with roses. Sometimes it arrives quietly in the form of someone who sees not what you lack, but who you are. Stay with us, because what happens next might just remind you the people the world calls too poor are often the richest in all the ways that matter. They didn't laugh at her torn hem or the patches on her satchel, but they didn't have to. Clara felt it in every glance that slid past her like wind through broken shutters, in every letter that never arrived, in every train that stopped and then left without her on it. She was too poor, not just in coin but in expectation. A girl from nothing, daughter of a mill hand, with no dowry, no trousseau, no silver brush to wrap in lace. She'd sent 15 letters in 2 years to distant towns seeking a husband who might want someone quiet, diligent, and kind. 15. Most went unanswered. 3 were returned. 1 had a note scrawled in pencil. "Try someone more refined." The townspeople didn't say much, but they looked at her shoes cracked, at her coat secondhand, at her hope wearing thin. Yet she carried herself as if she still believed in dignity, because she did. Even as her mother whispered, "It's too late for girls like us." Even as her sisters married men who never asked their opinions. Clara still lit a lamp in the window each night, still ironed her one good dress, still prayed for something gentle. Then came a letter, typed on thick paper sealed with wax, from a man named Josiah Callahan, owner of 2,000 acres, and a line that read, "I don't want fine china. I want someone who's known hunger and still chooses kindness." She read it 3 times, held it to her chest, and whispered the words she hadn't dared to say in months. "Maybe I'm not forgotten after all." But what happens when a woman raised to feel unworthy steps off a train into a town that doesn't want her, but meets a man who sees her anyway? How did Clara's beginning make you feel? Have you ever felt overlooked because of what you didn't have, not what you did? Stay with us, because what happens next will test not just her pride, but the quiet courage she's carried all along. The train shuddered as it slowed, wheels shrieking like a long-held breath finally let out. Clara stood before the glass, smoothing the wrinkles from her skirt, the one she'd restitched twice on the journey, and counted each pulse in her wrist. She had no gloves, no bonnet, just a plain suitcase, a letter folded in her bodice, and a prayer trembling in her chest. The station at Crescent Hollow wasn't grand. A wooden bench, a leaning post, 1 horse tied to the rail, and no one waiting. No one with a flower, no man tipping his hat, no sign that she was wanted. Clara stepped off the train anyway, quietly, dignified, As if disappointment were an old friend who walked beside her. A boy loading crates asked, "You waiting for someone, ma'am?" She opened her mouth, closed it, then forced a smile. I I think someone's waiting for me. The boy shrugged. Ain't seen no gentleman. Just some cattlemen and that fellow over there. He nodded toward a tall man in a dark vest standing beside a carriage hitched to a matched pair of white mares. He wasn't watching the train. He was watching the horizon like it owed him an answer. Clara stepped forward. "Excuse me," she said, her voice soft. The man turned. He was older than she expected, maybe in his mid-40s, sun-worn skin, gray at his temples, and eyes that looked not at her, but into her, as if weighing her not by lace or looks, but by the quiet she carried. "Clara Hawthorne?" he asked. "Yes, sir." He didn't smile, but he didn't look disappointed either. "I'm Josiah Callahan," he said. "Let's get you someplace warm." That was it. No handshake, no welcome. But he took her suitcase gently with both hands and opened the carriage door as if she were someone precious. They rode in silence at first past frost-covered meadows and barns standing lopsided in the wind. Then Josiah spoke. "I don't like fanfare. I reckon you don't either." She nodded. "I lost my wife 7 winters ago," he added. "We didn't have much, but we had honesty." He looked at her. "You strike me as someone who doesn't need much, but might offer something more." Clara swallowed. "No one's ever said that to me before." Josiah didn't answer. He just turned back to the road. But in that silence she felt it. Not pity, not possession, but respect, and maybe the very beginning of trust. Has anyone ever offered you dignity when you expected rejection? Have you ever been seen not as what you lacked, but as what you quietly carried? The road ahead for Clara and Josiah isn't paved with certainty, but sometimes the most powerful beginnings are the quietest ones. Josiah's ranch sat on a hill where the wind never quite rested. It wasn't lavish, not in the way the papers described men of means, but it was clean wide and built to last. Clara could tell by the beams, the glass, the way the door clicked closed like it had nothing to hide. But what unsettled her was the quiet. Too much space, too many chairs, rooms with nothing in them but dust and echoes. Josiah showed her to the guest room, a space clearly unused but made up all the same. He didn't linger, just nodded and said, "You'll find the stoves warm by 6. I rise before dawn." Then he left, and Clara stood alone, in a room with curtains embroidered by hands not her own. She placed her bag on the floor, then sat on the bed and stared at her hands, the ones cracked by laundry tubs, worn by other people's children, and calloused by years of proving her worth to those who never looked twice. Now, no one was demanding anything. No chores barked at her. No one scolded her for being too slow, too plain, too quiet. And that was what terrified her most. Because when no one is asking, you must ask yourself, what do I bring if not service? She woke early the next morning and tried to help, swept the porch, fetched water, even made coffee. But Josiah had already done it all. He didn't stop her, didn't scold her, but his silence made her ache. That evening, as they sat on the porch, the wind tugging at the hem of her dress, Clara finally asked, "Why did you choose me?" Josiah didn't answer right away. He looked out over the fields where dusk turned the wheat silver. Then said, "I didn't choose you out of charity, Clara. I chose you because I know what it means to be seen as only what you can give. And I reckoned, maybe you deserve to be more than what the world allowed you." Clara blinked. "Even if I have nothing," he turned to her, slow and certain, "you've got your name, you've got your spine, and you've got the courage to sit here beside a stranger and still call this a beginning. That's not nothing." And she looked away, not from shame, but because something deep inside her cracked, not from pain, but from the possibility that she was allowed to belong. Have you ever lived so long earning your place, you forgot how to simply receive it? Clara's learning how to stay, not by duty, but by dignity. But old habits don't fade easy. And when you've only known survival, peace can feel like a trick. It wasn't a grand fight. No raised voices, no shattered dishes, just the slow erosion of silence, the kind that comes not from peace, but from two people afraid of waking an old wound. Clara began leaving chores half done. Not out of laziness, but hesitation. What if she did too much? Would Josiah think she was overstepping? What if she did too little? Would he regret bringing her here? She found herself second-guessing every kindness, every cup of coffee, every glance. Even the way she stood at the door, was it too expectant? And Josiah noticed, but he didn't know what to say. Because part of him, the part that had grown up among men who measured worth in land and cattle, whispered a fear he didn't want to name. What if the world had been right about her? He hated himself for the thought, hated the voice inside him that sounded too much like his father's. Don't bring home a burden, son. Don't turn your wealth into a charity case. So he withdrew, quietly. He spent more time in the barn, came home later, ate in silence. And Clara, sensing the shift, didn't ask. Because when you've been cast aside before you learn not to reach too fast, you learn that being grateful sometimes means being invisible. But one night, it broke. She found an old letter in the drawer of the guest room, a returned mail order reply from years before, written by a man who had scribbled one word across her picture pour. She stared at it until her vision blurred. Then for the first time since arriving, she packed her bag, not with anger, but with sorrow. When Josiah found her at the porch, lacing her boots in the dark, he didn't speak right away. Just stood there, straw hat in hand, breath shallow. Going somewhere, he asked softly. She didn't meet his eyes. I don't belong in a house like this. I can't keep pretending. Josiah knelt beside her, voice thick. You think I brought you here to pretend? She looked up, tears burning. I think you brought me here to help you feel good about yourself. And when I wasn't enough, you pulled away. He swallowed hard, then whispered, I pulled away because I was afraid I wasn't enough. The air between them stilled, and for the first time the truth was naked between them. He continued, I've got land, Clara. I've got money. But I've never known how to give my heart without expecting it to be traded like cattle. She held the old letter between her fingers. Then maybe we're both still learning. He took it from her gently and tossed it into the fire pit beside the steps. Let it burn, he said. That's not who you are anymore. Have you ever mistaken distance for disinterest? When really it was someone else's fear speaking. Clara and Josiah just faced their ghosts. But burning one letter doesn't erase a lifetime of being dismissed. Will trust find a place to take root? The next morning, the frost hadn't yet left the fence posts, but Josiah was already in the kitchen. Sleeves rolled pan, sizzling with eggs and potatoes. Clara walked in quietly, expecting silence. Instead, he pulled out a chair. I don't always say the right things, he murmured, but I know how to show up. She sat unsure, still bruised from the night before. But he didn't push, just filled her plate, poured coffee, and said, Eat while it's hot. Cold breakfast's no good for a day like this. She didn't realize she was hungry until the first bite warmed her throat. Over the next few days, Josiah stopped trying to impress her with gestures. No flowers, no fancy words. Instead, he left her a folded shawl when the wind kicked up. Fixed the squeaky step on the porch she nearly tripped over. Built a small coop behind the barn because she'd once said, half joking, I miss the sound of hens. Each gesture was a whisper. You matter. You belong. You're not just passing through. And Clara slowly responded. She began humming again while sweeping. Left out extra biscuits just in case he came in late. One afternoon, she sewed a patch on his work shirt. He noticed. It's straighter than I ever managed, he said with a chuckle. She smiled, the kind of smile that lives just behind the eyes. But old habits die slow. One evening, they rode into town for supplies. At the general store, Clara overheard a pair of women whisper near the dry goods aisle. Isn't that the girl who was left at the station? She's living up at Langston's ranch now. Imagine someone like her. They didn't finish the sentence. They didn't have to. Clara stood frozen. Shame crept up her neck like a rash. But Josiah stepped beside her, slid his hand into hers, and said loud enough for the whole store to hear, She's with me, and she's earned more respect than half the folks in this town. The store went quiet. Clara didn't speak until they got back in the wagon. Her voice was small. You didn't have to do that. I know, he said, but I wanted to. She turned to him, eyes wide. Why? He looked at her like the answer was obvious. Because the world taught you to expect silence. But I'd rather teach you how it feels to be defended. That night back at the ranch, Clara placed her hand over his on the table. No words, just weight, warmth, willingness. It wasn't a declaration of love, not yet, but it was the closest she'd ever come to saying, I believe you mean it. Have you ever been defended so simply that it undid years of being ignored? Clara isn't healed overnight, but now for the first time she's not walking alone. So what happens when love is no longer something she fears, but something she begins to trust? Up until now, you've walked beside Clara from silence to survival, from shame to a seat at someone's table. But let me ask you, what have you felt along the way? Was it anger when she was left at the station like she didn't matter? Relief when Josiah held her hand in front of everyone? Or maybe something gentler, that flicker of hope when someone quietly stays instead of walking away? But here's the question that lingers now. Can love truly bloom when its roots were planted in broken ground? Will Clara trust this growing warmth, or will the world find a way to pull her back into doubt? Stay with us. The next part of her journey may be the most fragile of all. The telegram came on a Tuesday. Josiah found it tucked beneath a sack of feed brought in by the wagon boy, who didn't wait for a reply. Clara had been tending the herbs by the window. When Josiah handed her the folded note, her hand stopped moving. Something in her breath stilled. She read it once, then again. Your father's dead. I've no one else. If you have a shred of decency, come home. I need help. Mother? No dear, no love, no apology, just need, just demand. Josiah didn't press her. He only asked, do you want to go? Clara looked out the window. I don't know, she whispered, but I think I need to see. They left the next morning. Josiah hitched the wagon without a word. Clara packed one small bag and wore the plainest dress she owned, not to impress, but to anchor herself in who she had become. The road home was dustier than she remembered, the trees thinner, the silence thicker. When they reached the cabin where she'd grown up, Clara hesitated on the porch. Her mother opened the door before they could knock. She looked older, harsher, as if the years hadn't softened her, but carved her down to the bone. So you came, the woman said. Clara nodded. You asked. Her mother's eyes flicked to Josiah. Who's that, your boss? Josiah didn't flinch. Her husband. There was a pause. A flicker of something unreadable passed over the woman's face. She stepped aside. Inside, everything was smaller. The same cracked lamp. The same rug Clara used to sleep on as a child. She touched the edge of the counter where she once washed potatoes with bloody fingers after her mother said she was peeling too slow. Josiah stepped out to let them speak. Clara stood at the table. Her mother sat stiffly in the rocking chair. You didn't come to see him when he was dying, Clara said, voice calm. Her mother scoffed. He never asked. And I didn't need to see the mess he made of you. Clara blinked, but she didn't look away. You sold me, she said, for $5 and a cow. I fed you, her mother snapped, kept a roof over your head. At the cost of my soul's silence, I came, Clara continued, voice low. Not because you deserve my help, but because I deserve to say what you never let me say. Her mother didn't reply. Clara stepped closer. I'm not here to make peace with you. I'm here to make peace with myself. You don't have to understand it. You don't have to approve, but I will not carry your shame anymore. She turned to leave. Her mother called after her, not loudly but small. Do you hate me? Clara paused at the door. I don't know, she said honestly, but I don't need to love you to forgive myself. And with that, she stepped back into the light. Josiah was waiting by the wagon. He didn't ask how it went, just offered his hand. She took it not as a rescue, but as a choice. For the first time in her life, Clara walked away from her past without looking back. Have you ever faced someone who hurt you not to get even, but to get free? Clara's not running anymore. But what will she find now that her heart is unburdened? Is freedom enough, or is there still more waiting in love's quiet corner? The ride home was quiet. Clara didn't cry, didn't speak much. She sat with her palms flat on her lap, staring at the passing fields, the sun dropping low behind the hills, like a curtain slowly closing. Josiah glanced at her once, then looked back to the road. You did something hard today, he said gently. She nodded. I thought it would feel louder, she murmured. like a door slamming shut. But it didn't. It just ended. Josiah didn't reply right away. Then he said, "That's how some chains break," quietly. Back at the ranch, things looked the same. But when Clara stepped off the wagon, something in her posture had changed. Taller not because anyone had lifted her, but because she had stood on her own. She walked into the house ahead of Josiah, started the kettle and pulled out the flour without needing to ask what came next. That evening they sat on the porch as twilight settled around them. "Josiah," she asked softly. He turned. "I never said thank you. You don't have to." "I know, but I want to." He gave her that crooked half smile. "Then I'll take it." They sat in silence again, but it wasn't the kind that fills the space when words are missing. It was the kind that settles in when nothing needs to be said. Clara glanced down at her hands. No ring yet, no ceremony. Just work-worn fingers and a heart that had finally stopped trembling. Then she reached for his. "Do you think we could plant something this spring?" she asked. Like what anything she said. Something that takes root. Weeks passed, then months. Spring came early. Clara turned the soil near the porch, where Josiah built a little wooden fence just high enough to keep out the rabbits. She planted sage tomatoes and, at Josiah's quiet suggestion, lavender. "It's stubborn," he said. "Takes a while to grow, but when it blooms, it keeps blooming." Clara smiled. Like some women I know, the townspeople still talked, some with curiosity, some with dismissal, a few with quiet admiration. They said, "She's the girl who got sold for a cow. She's the one the rich rancher took in." But over time, they started saying something else. "She runs that ranch like it's hers. She's the one who makes those honey biscuits. She's the one who walks beside him, not behind." One warm Sunday, Josiah took her hand during the church blessing and didn't let go. No announcement, no declaration. But Clara looked around at the pews at the people, at the woman she once was. And she didn't feel small. She felt rooted. They married quietly in summer beneath the cottonwood Josiah's father had planted long ago. Just a few neighbors, a basket of bread, no veil, no lace. Clara wore a blue cotton dress and the faintest touch of wildflowers in her hair. When the preacher asked if she would love, honor, and walk beside Josiah, she smiled. "I already do." And when Josiah was asked the same, he simply said, "I just wanted someone who knew how to stay." And she did. That night, after everyone had gone, Clara stood at the edge of the garden and watched the moonlight paint silver onto the rows of lavender. Josiah came up beside her, slipped his hand into hers. "Still think you're too poor?" he asked softly. Clara leaned her head on his shoulder. "No," she whispered. "I think I might be the richest woman I know, because love hadn't come to rescue her. It had come to recognize her, not as a prize, but as a partner. And she had chosen to stay not because she had to, but because she was finally home. Out on that wide patch of prairie where Clara once stood alone at a train station, holding nothing but her silence, now stood a woman who had finally been seen. She didn't win the world with riches. She didn't need lace, nor land, nor titles. She simply needed someone to stay, and someone finally did. The man who chose her didn't ask about dowries, didn't count what she lacked. He only noticed the way she carried herself with quiet dignity, even when the world told her she was worth nothing. And that made all the difference. You see, real love doesn't ask us to prove ourselves. It invites us to rest. It sees value not in what we bring, but in who we are. So if you've ever felt rejected for what you didn't have, if you've ever believed the lie that you were too poor, too plain, too late, maybe it's time to believe something kinder. Because the life you deserve might still be ahead. And the love you're waiting for may be waiting for you too. We'd love to hear from you. Have you ever felt overlooked only to be surprised by grace? Would you like to see more stories like Clara's? Please leave us a comment, share this with someone who needs it, and don't forget to subscribe to None, Wild West Saga. We tell stories that whisper to the quiet places in your heart, because everyone deserves to be seen.